The birth of Islam, Muhammad, the Quran, and the religio-cultural backdrop of 7th century Western Arabia. So, what was the basic message given in the Quran? And was Islam novel or original in its birth? A justified interpretation of the birth of Islam comes with the birth of Muhammad and an experience of the transcendent that he is said to have had over 1400 years ago. However, for Muslims themselves, followers of Islam, the religion of Islam has been proclaimed by the many prophets that came before Muhammad, such as even prophets that are mentioned in the Bible of the Christians and the Bible of the Jews, such as Abraham or Moses or Jesus. According to Muslims, each one of those prophets proclaimed the religion of Islam. But the word religion, called Islam, as we know today, we can say is connected with the birth and transcendent experience of Muhammad. Now, Muhammad was born in 570 CE. When his mother was pregnant with him, she is said to have had a dream in which she was told to name her son Muhammad. Now, Muhammad in these days was a very uncommon name, very unusual name, and so she was somewhat mystified by this dream and had suspicions whether she should do this. The normal thing to do at that time was to name your child after relatives such as a grandparent, aunt or uncle, grand aunt or uncle, often a someone who is recognized as a wonderful member of the family or clan or tribe that you want to honor by naming your child after this person. Nonetheless, she went through and named him Muhammad, which means the praiseworthy one. And today, Muhammad is the most common first name you find around the world. When Muhammad was born, he, according to the legends, the different idols or statues and statuettes of different gods and goddesses which were in the Kaaba all fell down or bowed down in reverence and awe to the new prophet that was born in their midst there in the city of Mecca in Western Arabia. Now father bore Muhammad's father died before Muhammad was ever born. His mother died when he was 6 years old, and he was raised by uncles after that. While his mom was still alive, he was mostly raised from a small child in the Arabian desert by a Bedouin family, and he learned the ways of the Bedouin nomads, such as how to care for and train camels, as well as the great honor that the spoken word has among the Bedouins, that a very refined and eloquent Arabic is what is one of the things that really makes a man a man. He had also had an experience while he was in the desert, while he was playing with some playmates, that two celestial beings, which appeared as mysterious men, came about all of a sudden while they were playing, and his friends ran away, and those men cut into Muhammad's body, took out his heart, and is said to have washed his heart with snow, and then put his heart back in after that. This is one of the legends that is told about Muhammad's childhood. Upon becoming a youth, Muhammad joined the businesses of his uncles, becoming a caravan leader, bringing camels from one part of the desert to another, uh, bringing goods on the camels, and he did this in such a way of integrity that he became known as El Amin. El Amin became his nickname, which means the trustworthy one. Now, when Muhammad became middle age, as he was approaching his 40s, he would retire into the wilderness. He would often go to a mountain just outside of Mecca called Mount Hira, and there he'd bring some supplies, provisions from home, and stay there for a number of days, sometimes a number of weeks at a time, where he would pray and meditate in a cave on Mount Hira and try to find answers to his relationship to the cosmos, to existence itself, to the transcendent, and try to find answers that are bothering him, such as why are there extremes of wealth and poverty? How come some people are born to great disadvantage and some people not? Why are some people orphaned like him? Why are some people not? Right? And upon meditating and praying in that cave, one day when he was 40 years old, a celestial being is said to have come down and spoken to him. The celestial being was later interpreted to be the angel Gabriel. And this being took Muhammad by the shoulders and squeezed them tight. And first he greeted him, Salam alaikum, Ya Rasulullah, which means, peace be upon you, O messenger of God. And then the angel commanded him, Ikra. Now, Ikra can mean proclaim, recite, rehearse, or read. So Muhammad seemed to be ambivalent about this command, and he responded with the words Ma akra. And Ma akra can either mean what do I read or I don't read. Okay, so the ma in akra can either be a negation, I don't read, or it can mean the questioning language of what do I read. Now it's mostly been interpreted as I don't read by Muslims, because for them one of the proofs of the religion of Islam itself is that an unlettered or illiterate prophet gave them this holy book, which is eloquent and exalted in style and beautiful to read and recite. And so Ma'akar, what do I read or I don't read? And the angel Gabriel replies back, holding him, squeezing him tight. Ikra, proclaim, recite, rehearse, read. Ikra bi isma rabbika alladhi khalaq. خلق الإنسان من علق. Ikra wa rabbuka al-akram. Proclaim, recite, rehearse, read in the name of thy Lord who created man from a clot of blood. Ikra, and thy Lord is the most bountiful. So these verses became part of the 96th chapter of the Quran, which is called Al-Alaq. So even though it's the very first revelation of the Quran, it's actually on the 96th chapter of the Quran out of 114 chapters. Now Muhammad was greatly perturbed and frightened by this experience with this mysterious celestial being. He went back home, left the cave, went back home quite quickly, saw his wife, and he asked her, cover me, cover me. He was quite afraid that perhaps some sort of evil being or a demon had come to him and tried to possess him. And Khadija, his wife, reassured him, by God will never disgrace you. You keep good relations with all people. You help the poor and the destitute. You serve your guests generously and assist the deserving, calamity afflicted ones. In other words, Muhammad always goes out his way to help others, that God, the most powerful being, would not let such a horrible thing happen as have encounters with demons or be possessed by demons. Now Muhammad did not immediately proclaim publicly these encounters and what had been given or revealed by such a celestial being. Rather, he gradually told his most immediate friends and family, and then only after a few years did he begin to proclaim more somewhat publicly and then more and more publicly the revelation he believed he had been given. Now Khadija became his supporter from the very beginning and is known as the first believer. Khadija was a wealthy business owner who owned a number of caravans and camel herds by which she would have goods transported from one place to another. Muhammad had become acquainted with her and she with him because of this reputation as Al-Amin that he had been given, that he, from his trustworthiness, she had asked him to lead her caravans and manage her caravans himself. And and then soon thereafter, maybe one or a few years later, she proposed marriage to him at the age of 25. Khadija herself was a widow, and before then, and um, then when they married, they managed to have there were between 7 and 9 children, although only 4 or 5 daughters lived into adulthood. It is said that Khadija was about 15 years older than Muhammad, so 25 years old versus 40 years old, although I'm somewhat skeptical about these numbers given just because of how biology works with biological clocks, and it would be hard for 9 children to be born while she was still in her 40s, or perhaps into her 50s. So it's probably an age difference, but the that gap may have been exaggerated. What was the scene of Islam's emergence? So a religion never comes out on a blank slate. Rather, whether it is invented by a human being or is actually the descent of some sort of inspiration or revelation from on high, it has to be communicated and addressed in a way that makes sense and is understood and connects with the people to whom that message is given. Okay, so what's the background of the people who are given this message and the background of Muhammad's socio-cultural context himself? First, we have Mecca, which is seemed to have been an ancient city, not particularly big at that time, not particularly big today either. But it was known as a trade route, and scholars debate whether it was a major stopping point in trade route or more minor stopping point in trade route. But it was part of a trade route nonetheless. It was also a site of pilgrimage. Mecca seemed to have had a house of worship or temple that was quite ancient, if we believe the legends, went back to the days of Abraham and his son Ishmael, or according to other legends, was maybe even went back to the days of Adam, according to Islamic belief. But this house was the Kaaba was dedicated to the worship of the one God, according to the legends, that one built by Abraham and Ishmael. But slowly, the different gods and goddesses of that region in which it was part of had become part of the Kaaba, so much that whatever tribal or ethnic group you came from, you could go to that Kaaba and find your own god or goddess there and worship that god or goddess in this house of worship. Even a statue of Mary and perhaps also a statue of Jesus is said to have been contained within this Kaaba. So the Mecca is Muhammad's hometown, and the tribe of the Quraysh were the leaders of Mecca. and they managed and organized the Kaaba, this house of worship, and supervised it. Muhammad was part of this tribe of Quraysh, although he was part of a minor clan within the Quraysh and not the leading clan at that time. And furthermore, Muhammad was challenged by the fact that he had been orphaned as a child, and was difficult for him to get an inheritance or ahead through these disadvantages. The other side of Islam's emergence is the city of Yathrib, which was a couple weeks north caravan ride from Mecca. And whereas Mecca is very much a desert sort of city, Yathrib was a oasis which had plenty of palm trees and fruit trees. There in Yathrib you have polytheist Arabs, so having multiple gods, as well as Jewish Arabs that were living side by side, and there seem to have also been some Christians that lived in Yathrib. And Yathrib became renamed Medina when Muhammad, after 13 years from his encounter with Angel Gabriel, he made his emigration called the Hijra and emigrated north, seeking safety and refuge, as well as opportunity to be both a religious and political leader within Yathrib. And so the last 10 years of Muhammad's life and the last 10 years of his proclamation of the Quran would would occur within Yathrib or Medina. And so Medina was a name that Yathrib was given, and it literally means city. Okay? So Yathrib became known as Medina al-Nabi, or the city of the prophet. So what is the nature of these religious forms among the Arabs at this time? So the Arabs believed in multiple nature and fate gods. So gods of, say, the river and mountains and valleys and stars and the moon. And some of these gods were seen as being very involved in the fate or one's destiny, and one could pray to or give offerings to these gods so that one's fate could be changed or modified according to the belief. And many of these gods were housed within the Kaaba itself. Now, loyalty to the clan and tribe was paramount within this worldview and practice. So you might have your name, but more important than who you are as your individual identity is who you are as your identity as being part of a clan or being part of a tribe. Your glory and honor was the glory and honor of the clan and the tribe, and the clan and the tribe's glory and honor was your glory itself. People knew who were their ancestors, took very pride in if they had a famous or very respected or beloved ancestor. This too became part of their identity. Poetry was very much revered in this cultural context. The spoken word itself was very much revered. Poetry would embody the values of chivalry, of perhaps even exorbitant generosity, of bravery and warfare. It also speak of the romantic escapades of Don Juan type of men and their relations with women. This poetry, some of it very beautiful, was recited, made, memorized, and in one's tent or home or around the fire, this poetry would be shared along with different stories about different supernatural beings or stories about the prophets that had come before. There were legends of pre-Islamic Arabian prophets, such as Hud and Saleh, and Hud and Saleh would become prophets that were mentioned in the Quran later on. There are also knowledge and stories of, at least some knowledge and stories of the prophets of the Bible within this context. So according to their legend, as we mentioned, the Kaaba itself, which literally means cube, is this black box or black cube, was built by Abraham along with his son Ishmael. This was the first son of Ishmael who, with his mom, was exiled from Abraham's home. But it's said that Abraham came and saw them and make sure they're doing well. And at this time, he built this house or temple of worship dedicated to the God of the Jews, the universal God. Um, whether or not it was seen as the universal God at this time can be debated, but this God Elohim or Yahweh became known as Allah, the God. So even though this house of worship was dedicated to the worship of the one God, many other gods had been added to it over the years, decades, and centuries after Abraham, according to the legend. And Muhammad saw as one of his missions was to reconstitute this house of worship as one dedicated to the one God, literally called the God, Allah. Al means the, La means God, the God, Allah. So this is the scene of Islam's emergence in Mecca and Medina. Also, this region called Abyssinia would be prominent in the origins of Islam. Many of the early Muslims, due to persecution, would flee and look for refuge in Abyssinia. Close overlaps with modern day Ethiopia and Eritrea. And there was a just and fair-minded, compassionate king who is said to have given many of the early Muslims refuge and a haven from persecution. To the northwest, there was the Byzantium kingdom, or the Eastern Roman Empire. Okay, this was a Hellenistic, Greek-influenced cultural region. It's also very Christian. You also have, to the northeast, the Sasanian Empire in Persia, or the remains of it, this great empire that had gone back to the days of Cyrus, or Cyrus and Darush, or Cyrus and Darius. And the Persians are predominantly Zoroastrians at this time, who believes in a good God against a great evil spirit who are competing for the affections of human beings, but the good God will eventually win, and you should get on side of that good God through having pure thoughts, pure words, and pure actions, or good thoughts, good words, and good actions in your life, and you will be held accountable on the day of judgment after you die for what you do in this life, and your deeds and the contents of your life will be embodied in that afterlife as you cross a bridge. And if you did well, you'll meet a beautiful maiden who's a representation of your deeds. If you did very poorly in your life, an old hag will be met on this bridge. Depending on it, the idea of the bridge itself that you cross became part of Islamic beliefs about what happens in the afterlife, and we could speculate that the idea of that the contour of your life is embodied in a beautiful woman, if you did well, perhaps became part of Islam in the belief that there's different huris, or black-eyed pure maidens in which one would meet in the afterlife in different gardens upon death. The Persian Empire also had large Jewish communities as well as some Christian and Buddhist communities.